Welcome to Upon Walton Farm. I'm Nick, and I'd like to share with you the very first in a series of vlogs that are stories from my life upon Walton Farm, which is a beautiful historic stone farmhouse and property filled with gardens and even an old barn. This series is devoted to gracious living, beautiful antiques, gorgeous music, good cooking, and of course friends and family. Today's episode is rather French inspired, and I will be cooking Crêpes Suzette, and I will be able to show you how easy and delicious this old recipe is. We will be learning a lot about a great French chef from the turn of the 20th century, Louis Diat, who was famous for inventing vichyssoise. We will also be looking at beautiful antiques from the Louis XV period and some Hungarian antiques. And a bit of a surprise will be some Fabergé. We will also explore the music of the French composer Louis Couperin, and I will be delighted to play for you a wonderful composition entitled Tic-Toc, Choc, Rouler des Maillotins. Before we begin cooking, I'd like to share with you this wonderful cookbook that I bought about 20 years ago in a used bookstore and paid only $3 for it. And it was a find. And it was my introduction to the life and work of the famous French chef Louis Diat, who served the Waldorf Astoria in New York City for over 40 years. When I took the book home and opened it and was leafing through it and getting familiar with it, I found in it that someone had pressed these 4-leaf clovers. This book was printed in 1961, and it only went to a second printing in 1962. And so this really makes this book very special. And I've consulted this book. It really was a treasure. I've consulted this book many, many times. And I use it more, really, than any French cookbook I have. I do, of course, consult with Julia Child all the time, and Larousse, but Louis Diat's recipes are actually a lot simpler, and they're very direct. And you'll find there are only 6 ingredients for his crepe recipe. He has several in the book and several variations of it, but they're very simple and to the point. There's a picture of him in the beginning, before the foreword, and a little biographical information on him. He was born in 1885 in the Bourbonnais town of Montmartre. And really, it's near France's culinary heart, which is Lyon. He apprenticed at the Maison Calandre in Moulins, and from Moulins, he went to Paris. First at the Hotel Bristol, and then the Hotel de Reims, the Ritz Paris, and the Ritz London. Finally, he found his home in the United States and served for 40 years as the head chef, or the chef de cuisine, for the Ritz-Carlton in New York City. He is most famous for having invented vichyssoise, the cold potato and leek soup, which I will be making in this series. For his contributions to the culinary arts, he was made an officier du mérite agricole by the French government. And his recipe really for crepes is 6 ingredients: flour, sugar, salt, eggs, milk, and cream. And then he goes on with a list of things that you can flavor the mixture with if you choose and to flavor them with orange or cherry or raspberry. But really, it's the master recipe is very simple. And we will be learning much more about Louis Diat in this series, and I hope you learn to appreciate his work and his writing. Let's begin to cook. What you're going to find with crepes is they're very easy. If you can make a pancake, you can make a crepe. It's just a thinner pancake. And the batter itself is thinner. And Louis Diat warns us of this. He has 2 versions for even the very initial recipe. One that has 3 eggs and then 3 egg yolks separated. I am using the thinner version because it does create a much thinner, lighter crepe. Also, what was very interesting in doing the research for this, Julia Child has a lot of crepe variations in her book, and I highly recommend that you read through her. You'll learn quite a great deal. And she even has one for savory crepes that has their yeast, which that recipe is closer to a blini. And I'm going to have an episode, our caviar episode, I'm going to show you how to make blinis. But for right now, I do think the lighter version is ideal. I've laid out my ingredients, and we have these gorgeous oranges. They're in season. I always love getting them with the leaves on because they're great. Not only they're visual for decorating, and also when they're small, they're very, very delicious. For garnishing later, I love blood red oranges. So that is my addition to the recipe with normal oranges. I only use them as a garnish because they will turn the sauce a little too red when we get to that point. So what I've done, first of all, is I've separated my eggs. I have 2 egg yolks and then 2 complete eggs. And we're gonna whip them first. And he advises whipping this in a separate bowl, but I have found that this is fine. If you want to cut down on mess, just one bowl, begin with the eggs. What he advises, which is very nice, that no one else has said this, but he said the crepe batter must be light. And he advises that you do not overbeat this or whip it. And I do agree with that. If you overbeat it, it's going to turn into a very thick and heavy consistency that will not spread. Now, into the eggs, what I'm going to add is I am going to sift the dry ingredients. He recommends it, Julia Child recommends it, because it's going to be lighter. You don't want compacted flour. So I have measured out 2/3 a cup of flour. And I'm gonna just sift it into the bowl. And I just use a little, I don't use the big sifter, I have one, but this is just easier and it's less mess, just a tiny little sifter. It's done in a few seconds. And the rest of the flour. What's wonderful about crepes is if you omit the sugar, which we're going to get to next, really what you're going to have, you can have a savory crepe. You can use them for the petit déjeuner in the morning. You can have them for lunch. You can have them for dinner. You could have them for dessert. They're just so wonderfully flavorful. And this time of year, as we're entering Lent, we're really in the Carnival or festival time. And in France, they're eating beignets and crepes constantly between the Feast of the Epiphany and Ash Wednesday, when the Great Fast begins. And now I'm going to put my sugar in, and I am sifting it in case there are any lumps. Wonderful. And so now we begin to gapine that, and I do mix this before adding the milk, which is next. And it'll get a little crumbly. Just mix it through. Don't go nuts. And now we're going to add 1 3/4 cup of whole milk. Okay? This is something I really think is important. These recipes are written in a way that are very specific. If you start using part skim or something, it will throw off your recipe. So use whole milk. And again, just enough to get it thoroughly combined. Eventually, a pinch of salt goes in. This batter needs to rest for 2 hours, so directly after mixing it, I am going to begin everything you need for the sauce, because that is very, very important. And the sauce for this that's served on the crepes, and you really fold the crepes in the sauce, it's a very simple But one thing you can do in advance is the sugar cubes, which I'm going to talk about. And if you don't have sugar cubes, you can use orange rind that you finely mince and just sugar, mix it together, and Bob's your uncle. Great, that looks very, very good. Okay. So also what you need is just a pinch of salt. So I'm going to take a pinch, put it in, and we're done. Now, here comes the stage of flavoring this, and you can use Grand Marnier, you can use brandy, you can use any liqueur, you can omit the liqueur. When it is cooked, the alcohol is going to cook out. If anyone's worried about that, if anyone has any type of allergy to anything, it absolutely can be omitted. I reduce the amount. I'm only putting 1/3 of a cup in. He is recommending for the brandy, and pardon me on this, is just 1 tablespoon of cognac. So I'm putting in maybe a teaspoon, not too much. I don't like it to taste too much like alcohol. It's really overwhelming. Make sure if you're going to use a brandy or a French cognac or any cognac, I'm using cognac, it must be something you would like to drink, because when you cook with anything that has alcohol in it, all it does is concentrate the flavor and the flavor of itself. It does bring out flavors in your food. It really does. Alcohol is very good at that. It's almost like using vinegar, which does the same thing. But you don't want to use some ultra cheap thing just because you're cooking with it and you're not going to be drinking it. No, because that awful tasting brandy or cognac or wine, whatever it is, it's going to taste even worse when it's cooked. So it doesn't have to be some wonderful Napoleon brandy that's $500 a bottle. It's just a good quality, reasonably priced, drinkable cognac or brandy. And we mix that in right now as well. Now at the very end, we are going to add some butter, and I've had some butter warming on the stove. You have to, it has to be liquefied. And so you'll see my Aga in a moment. I just let things on there and they melt nicely. And so now for our butter, and it's 2 tablespoons of melted butter, right in, simple. And that's it. There's your batter. It's done. Mix it in, let it set for 2 hours, put it aside. It doesn't need to be refrigerated. Don't let it sit out too much longer. Also, this is not something like you want to rise. Like those of you who have an Aga, who frequently put your bread on the warming tray and it helps it rise, do not do that with this, because your eggs and milk will go bad. Okay? So now on to the little things for the sauce to get ready in time. So I'm going to set that aside. And what both recipes say to do, and it's kind of fun actually, almost no one uses sugar cubes anymore. My mother always had sugar cubes if there was something like an afternoon tea, or if there was a guest and there was coffee at the end of dinner, always there would be some type of sugar cube. She was very particular about that. You can still get them. I got this in the local grocery store, and they're not some outrageously expensive item. But what you do is you take a good orange. Now here's where you cannot cut on cost. The orange, I feel, must be organic. Louis Diat and Julia Child were writing in a time where it was assumed things were natural. Okay? Oranges, citrus, and a lot of fruits, they'll have wax on them. The pesticides, you can't have that with this. You need an organic orange, and make sure you wash it thoroughly. Don't overwash it though, or don't start scraping it and getting crazy with it, because you need the oil from the orange. And what you do is you rub your sugar cube all over the orange, every side of it, and this is going to flavor the sugar. That's going to be used in the sauce that we're going to make after we do our crepes. And the sauce is really fun. It's one of the most dramatic things I think you do at the dining table, other than a seared foie gras or a steak Diane. That's an old recipe that I'll be doing. That's a wonderful old recipe where you prepare it at the table. And I am not going to prepare the sauce at the table today, but I'm going to do the finishing of it in the dining space that I've arranged. And so there's your sugar cube, and you just set that aside too. Well, what you will need for the sauce is you're going to need a cup of orange juice, fresh squeezed if possible. Anything else will do. And some, I would say about a tablespoon of the zest from the orange. So do not, when you peel the orange, I just use a regular vegetable peeler. It's so easy. And so I peel the rind off, but not the white part. That's important because the white part is bitter. All you want is the essence from the orange oil. And so what I've done is, if you could see, I have my sugar cubes and I have my orange zest. What I'm going to do with the sugar cubes is I'm going to pound them in a mortar and pestle, and then that will go into the sauce later. Then the other thing is, the sauce usually does have some type of alcohol in it, and it's usually an orange liqueur, and I'm using orange liqueur today. And I do like to garnish with some lovely mint, which we'll see in a bit. So see you in a few moments. Let's go into the dining room and see what I've set up while we let the batter rest. A quick moment for Louis XV, or Louis XV, the son of the famous Roi de Soleil, the Sun King, Louis XIV, or Louis XIV. The two styles are very different. Louis XV preferred very naturalistic looking architecture, furnishings, and art, and therefore a predominant feature is the curved leg. Most Louis XIVs, you will see a straight neoclassical leg. On Louis XV, it is always curved, and you see the addition of bronze ormolu to reflect naturalistic themes. Also, marquetry was very important to both periods, and this table is beautifully inlaid with rosewood and mahogany. Functionality was very important in the 18th century, and also it was a bit of fun. This table can be converted. All of the leaves drop down, and so you have various ways of utilizing the piece. I wanted to show it to you early in the episode before I address it for our lovely dessert. Thank you for this moment for Louis XV. Now we're ready to make the crepes, and I'm going to use my trusty crepe pan. This is a great crepe pan from France. It's cast iron and it does the job. It's also great for just regular pancakes. And so you want to heat it up. You don't want to get it scorching hot. You can test with a little droplet of water, or put a little butter on and see if it sizzles. So what you're going to coat the pan with some butter. He suggests clarified, but I just use normal butter. I don't bother clarifying it. I actually think it adds a nice brown hue. Use the same scoop, decide on your size, and use it. What's important, I actually do it off the heat so you can see, not just you, but that what you must do is you must rotate. When you put this on, in the middle, immediately rotate it all over the pan completely, just like that, so that you get nice, even, uniform crepes. Okay, and all the way down. And luckily, this has a lip on it. It's designed for this, which makes it nice and easy. And it really is only about a minute each side. Once you start to see it bubble, we're going to flip it. And, I do recommend, use a good spatula. And sometimes I also use a wooden spoon. I find that very helpful. I actually had a crepe. It's just this long, wide thing that they use in France. I got it at a Bacon, and I just prefer my usual utensils. So you're going to go around the edge and see if it loosens. And it is. And just wait. You don't want any liquid on the top. You want to make sure it's solidified, because when you flip it, you don't want to mess over everything. So I use the end of a spoon like this. And so I go around and I get underneath it. And then very simply pick it up And there you go. And it unfolds nicely. And we just need to brown it on the other side. And we'll do another one in a second. Some of it tore, but the next one will be better. The first one, I will say, is always a little bit tricky. And we'll just give it a moment. And then you can layer them in between sheets of parchment, or just stack them and keep them warm until, and they'll keep, you can make them a day in advance. You could keep them, actually, they'll keep for at least a week, and you can freeze them. They freeze very well. Just be careful when you defrost them, and you want them at room temperature when you get to the sauce stage. So this is something you can make well in advance. And it is very easy to make the sauce and assemble it really at the last minute. It is something quite wonderful. And so this one's finally ready. And so I flip it over and then right onto the plate, like so. So I have a little bit that tore. And so we just scrape it off. And like Julia Child said, who's to know? Who's to know? And so again, I repeat the process, the butter and more of the mixture. And here again, I'm going to do it in the air. It really is, that is important because you must turn it immediately or you're going to have very deformed crepes. So you put it right on and begin turning immediately. Do not wait. You need a strong arm. Actually, this pan is heavy. I could see, gives you a good workout in the kitchen. And so we're just going to wait for it to bubble. And I think I'm going to wait a little longer for this one because I think the first one was a little, we'll call it my test. And I love crepes in Paris. You know, almost anywhere in France, you go and there's, on every street corner, there's someone making crepes and they make it look so easy. And it really is. You just need a little practice. I need practice all the time too. And this one's becoming ready to flip. And so I go around the edges just to make sure, and so that things don't burn. It's windy here today. My kitchen door almost flew open. I wonder if a storm is coming through. I hope not. And so you can see if you use this thicker batter version, which is 3 eggs and 3 yolks, that does help. This is very, very thin. And so it can be quite difficult to work with, especially getting the crepes off. But this is just about ready. It's starting to bubble, if you could see. I want to show you. Okay. And you see right here, yeah, I didn't quite get it quite perfect, but for Crêpes Suzette, no one really sees this because we fold them. We make little triangular purses out of them. They're really very charming, very elegant. So they don't have to be perfect because what we're going to do to it later, they'll appear quite perfect. And so now I'm going to see. This one looks quite good, I think. I think we've won, finally. We've gotten it right. Courage. As Julia Child said, you need courage in the kitchen. You need courage. I believe she said you need the courage of your convictions. This is right. And so I'm going to use the edge of a spoon and I'm going to get underneath it, hopefully without tearing it. And then I'm going to flip it over. And then in between, I take it. Aha! I had the courage. And I pull the spoon out. This actually works quite nicely. And you see, there it is. The spoon technique works. You don't need a fancy French stick. If you have one though, use it. Why not? And so we're going to repeat this process. And this will make a good 10 to 12 crepes, this recipe, depending on the size. If they're a little smaller, you're going to get more. If they're bigger, you're going to get less, okay? I do like it about the size of a dinner plate because we, as I said before, we're going to fold them. And it does make a difference. Well, welcome to this little nook in my dining room. And really, this is the first time I'm really using it for something. Usually it's just an area where people gather for some hors d'oeuvres before dinner, but I thought this is a very intimate dessert, and this would be a wonderful time to use that Louis XV table and come up with a nice little intimate space for two people to enjoy a very elegant and dramatic dessert. What really inspired me were these gorgeous roses, these orange roses. I grow a variety of these. Right now it's winter here, so these are, they're from a shop. But what I grow is, the variety is a hybrid tea Tropicana rose. And when you see it this summer, it's to die for. And they're so easy to grow. They're wonderful. I also used a Toile De Jouy runner that I had with a lot of nature and vines and birds. And I use some of the oranges too. I like to bring what we're eating into the table decoration. Another beautiful thing that is from Paris are these gorgeous table runners that are this wonderful crepe chiffon that are delicately embroidered to look like leaves. They're just wonderful. And here is our Hungarian antiques I was going to talk about. This is the Heren, this is from Heren, China. What you're looking at right now is the Fortuna pattern, which is from about the 1960s. Their china is all hand painted in Hungary. They're not decals. That's why I love this china. I love people who are artistic and can paint, because it's something I never really learned to do. If we go around too, I'd like to show you the plate, and I'll remove the napkin with the serviette. And they're really just charming. This pattern, I've combined two different patterns. This matches, and it's the same rust that's used in the Fortuna. This is the bouquet chinoiserie, Chinese bouquet in rust. They still make this. These are antique, but they still produce them. And because we're going to have a little coffee after dessert, I thought I would put out the coffee service, and this is mixed. It's in the Fortuna, and the after dinner cups are in the Chinese bouquet. The special moment, and the star probably of this, is the flatware. I pulled out a Fabergé Dessert Service that I have. It belongs to a larger service. It's a very complete service, and it's beautiful. It's called the Opera Russe by Fabergé. And if you could see, there are musical instruments. And beautiful, delicate, some of them have birds on them. Each piece is different. This has birds. Here we have a basket of flowers on the knife. And it's just so wonderfully elegant. I remember my mother, the things you pick up from your parents. She said, Nikki, if it's Fabergé, you can't go wrong. And I think she's right. There's an interesting history about this service. Really, in around the 1980s, the molds for this service were found in a barn in the Baltics. And the Fabergé family, which still runs the Fabergé business, started reproducing this gorgeous silver. It's just magnificent. And unfortunately, they have the House of Fabergé now only focuses on jewelry and timepieces. They no longer make the beautiful flatware, eggs, dishes, objets d'art, objets de vertu. And so it's one of my treasures. And I'm so pleased to share it with you. Now we're ready for the sauce, and it couldn't be easier. So in my mortar and pestle, I'm going to put the sugar cubes. Very simply, just pound them. They'll collapse almost immediately. There's something therapeutic about using one of these, especially if you have a bigger one and have a lot of stuff to grind. It really gets out any tension you might have. or any anger, all gone. Now, that gets combined with butter. I've let the butter liquefy. It doesn't have to, but the butter has to be soft, okay? I've let it just liquefy here on the Aga. So all of that goes into the butter. That's 4 sugar cubes. So it's not a lot of sugar, really. I would not call this an overly sweet dish. If you had it here in the United States, you'll probably find it's probably way too sweet. So that's combined. And then, but first, so that's ready. We're gonna do the juice of 1 orange and a couple drops, just a squeeze or 2 of lemon, just to brighten it up. And so it's gonna go into a hot pan. You know what, I'm gonna do a little more because I'm making some for later. And as you could see, my crepes eventually came out quite nice. Now I will say, like some of them tore and they're not perfect, you know, but you'll see. We put them together and it's really very easy. And anything that isn't quite cosmetically beautiful, we're gonna fix it ourselves. Okay, so when that begins to get warm, I'm gonna go to my other burner, which is a little bit hotter. It's actually quite a bit hot than the other burner. I'm gonna have a special on cooking with an Aga. I love the Aga. It's the best investment. I tell everyone, it was the best investment I ever made. I love this thing. I couldn't live without it. And so we let this come up, and then we're gonna add the butter and the sugar, which really, to be honest with you, is the foundation of this sauce. It's really what gives it a beautiful texture. When working with butter, butter is great. There really is no substitute for it. In my mind, I know some people can't have it, and I'm so sorry for you. And I'm so grateful that I can have dairy. And so we just let this come to a boil. I'm also going to do something you should not do, especially if you have a gas range that is an open flame. This is gas operated, but it's operated below, okay? There's no visible flame. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in the Grand Marnier. The recipe again there's a lot. he has a half cup. I'm probably doing a quarter of a cup. I don't, again, like a lot of alcohol. And these recipes, when you look through, that's why I love researching recipes. Looking at what other chefs and cooks have done and written about over, really, I'm looking at centuries now. Because if we even go back to Couperin and Escoffier, these recipes have changed over time. And they're meant to be adapted. They're not this sacred, thing that can't be touched. You do want to use a wide but deep pan. You don't want a small saucepan because you're going to see. Now I'm going to add the zest from 1 orange. And then as this warms up, have your serving plate ready. The one thing I love about the Aga is I have this warming tray. I also have a warming drawer. I'm always hesitant to put fine china in the warming drawer, but I guess if it's fired, it won't crack. The more delicate things I just let them on top. Now that the sauce is ready, what I suggest doing is they will tell you to float them in the sauce. Well, if your crepes are very delicate, they could fall apart. So what I do is I make the triangles first, because the sauce is going to be poured all over it. And there you go. Simple. Fold once, fold twice, fold again, until everything is repeated. This, I think, is the easiest way. And you can make a nice arrangement on your platter, and I'm going to show you the garnishes in a minute, or the garniture. I'm always lapsing into different languages. It's some type of rare idiosyncrasy I have. And you continue like so, and it really is simple, beautiful, elegant. And again, with all of this, feel free, again, to adjust the amounts when it comes to the flavorings. Not the master recipe. You have two choices. 2 eggs and 2 egg yolks, or 3 eggs and 3 egg yolks. That's about it. And I've kind of fanned them out. And now I'll very simply, after we're finished decorating, and let me get that so you can see it. I think that's good. Pardon my... And now I'm going to arrange oranges. So like I said, I love blood red oranges. So throughout, I like to serve the whole orange. This is not in the recipe. He just serves it with the zest and the flavored butter, and that's it. So there are extra ones. And very nice, and we could put some mint. I think some mint would look lovely. Maybe right here. Do you all like that? I think that's lovely. And my favorite, the blood red oranges. Let me move my mint. My mint is not cooperating. Ah, voila, this is just lovely. Oh, par excellence. And all you do is you're going to pour the sauce over, which I do think is the best way to go with this, again, because you don't want crepes turning into mush. And you do want to get it pretty much, if your crepes are thin, they'll dry out. So get it all over nicely. Voila. And then let's arrange them a little bit more. I have forgive my reach, but now that they have this sauce, I don't want to, my hands are scrupulously clean, but très bien. And now for the final step, we're going to go into the dining area and we're going to see how to serve it. Now we're here in our lovely dining space, and I have some warm brandy, and we're going to pour it all over, and the finishing touch. Voila. I hope you can see how elegant it is. Be very, very careful, but it is quite wonderful. I don't know if you can get the flames, but it's very dramatic for guests. And they eventually die out. This is the perfect dessert to enjoy with someone special and with your favorite champagne or sparkling cider. Thank you for joining me on Walton Farm. Santé.